If everybody in the room could blank themselves out while we start the Astro Imaging channel. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight, we're going to have a presentation from Danny Perry of the Riverside Astronomical Society. He's going to be telling us about how to power your rig when you're away from home. And we'll hear about, if you got your questions about batteries and connectors and wires and all that stuff, please send them along over in the chat. I believe that chat's called Rumble Talk, but I'm not sure for sure. But if you go over to, let me share my screen here, and you can see over there. Nope, I'm not sharing my screen for some reason. Oh, that's why. Anyway, you can ask all your questions over there, and we will occasionally interrupt Danny and ask your questions and so forth. So, by the way, I'm going to be at NEAF, I know, and Tolga is going to be at NEAF, I'm sure, and at NEAC, the Northeast Astro Imaging Conference before that. So we won't be having a show on April 7th, is it? Yeah, because we'll be gone. But we hope to see all of you there. Anybody that is, please, come up and say hi. I'll be the one that looks like me. And Tolga, you can see his picture down there when he's around. We have a couple of other things coming up on the schedule. Next week, Ron Brecher will be coming up. He's, I think today, he's finishing up his big workshop with Warren Keller on Pix Insight. And he's going to be telling us about pixel math and Pix Insight. And then on the 7th, as I said, April 7th, we're not going to have a show. Unfortunately, we've got Ray had to cancel on us for PemPro, so we don't have anything yet for the 14th, but we'll be figuring out something for the April 14th. After that, Bob Denny is going to be coming up telling us about some improvements in his products that he's got that are pretty important. Tom Bash is going to be talking about some high-resolution I think solar and lunar imaging, but the concepts are pretty much the same in that high resolution planetary type stuff. And then where was May? Where'd May go? There's May. Charles Bracken's coming on May the 5th. That's going to be cool. Charles Bracken, you know, from various books and everything he's written, and he's going to be telling us about picking targets. May 12th is open right now, but we're working on filling that. Greg Crinklaw is coming on the 19th to tell us about SkyTools 4. And then on the 26th of May, Sydney from the Astrobin is going to tell us about how he makes his beautiful images. But tonight, the show belongs to Danny. Danny, if you could turn your mic back on and get ready to go, and your video and whatever else you're going to do, because we're going to be turning it over to Danny Perry from the Riverside Astronomical Society. Here you go, Danny.
All right, thank you, Alex. Just a final check. Can you hear me okay, everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. So, yeah, what I wanted to talk about today is powering your equipment in the field. I know a lot of people don't really go out to the field much anymore. It seems like we all have observatories or a dark sky location that has line power, AC power. But I think some of us still go out in the middle of nowhere and like to be able to take a mount, telescope, camera, be able to power all that stuff. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. So I just wanted to go over some of the basics in terms of calculating what kind of power you would need, different ways of recharging, different types of battery technologies, and those kinds of things. So I think we'll go ahead and get started, and I will share my screen here. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see that.
You're good, Danny. You're good.
Okay. All right. So just a little recap. Some of the things I already talked about, but we'll just do a little tiny bit of math, which is just really just going over Watt's law, which is not the same as Ohm's law. Ohm's law is not as important for us. How to measure and estimate power requirements, and then how to use multimeters to get more accurate measurements. And then talk about some different power supplies and things like that. And then we'll go into power sources, which includes batteries for most of our needs when we're out in the field. And some of the devices related to that, like inverters and some of the equipment that's out there right now, which has all those things built into one. I'll go in a little more detail as far as measuring and estimating not just what power you'll need, but how much you'll need to recharge if you're out for multiple nights. If you're out for one night, chances are you can probably use some equipment, get enough battery power, and not have to worry about recharging until you get home. But I think a lot of us at various starter parties, whether it's in Florida or Texas or California or wherever, AC power is not always available, and we're there for multiple nights, so some recharging options might be useful. And then just a real quick recap of putting all those things together, and what does that mean as far as how far we can go, what can we do, how many nights can we be out there, all those good kinds of things. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So sorry, this isn't in presentation mode, so instead of showing things one by one, I think we're just going to get everything on the slide all at once. So hopefully that works out and doesn't create any problems for us. Watt's law is really simple. It deals with amps, watts, and volts. And so those are the three things you really need to know about to estimate your power needs, what kind of battery power you're going to need in the field, and then to also figure out what kind of power your equipment is using. So amps is current. Energy consumption, if you want the bigger picture of everything that's being consumed, that's more about watts. And then volts, I think we all kind of know just kind of casually as, 110, 120 volts at home, 12 volts in the field. So that comes into play as well. And then obviously Ohm's law, we don't need to talk a whole lot about. There are situations where you might want to look into that a little bit more, and as far as the size of your wires and cables, that kind of stuff. But we won't cover that all that much today, or at all. And so what Watt's law says is that if you know any two of those values, whether it's amps and volts, watts and amps, volts and watts, you can figure out the third missing one. So I used an example of a Canon DSLR power supply over here. And if you look at these, they all have their power ratings on them, the input and the output. What you want to look at is the output. And it's going to give you an idea of what that device will need power-wise. It's not going to give you a real accurate measurement because it's going to show you the maximum of what it needs in amps, but it'll give you an idea of what you need. So in this particular example, it obviously shows us here, I don't know if you can see it, 8 volts and 3 amps. So just based on this one here, we can figure out that that's going to be 24 watts. But each of those numbers are important. And depending on the way you look at things and the way you look at batteries and the way different batteries are advertised as far as their capacity, you'll typically find amp hours or watt hours. But if you use this Watt's law, you'll be able to figure out either one of those depending on the number you're given. So that's all in terms of math, I'm happy to say. So if you take a look at the equipment that you typically will need in the field, I put laptop here. A lot of people are getting away from laptops. They're using the mini computers, the Raspberry Pi type computers, a tablet maybe. But a laptop, I think for most of us is still the case. I think you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And that's going to run anywhere from 1 to 6 amps, depending on how current your laptop is. And again, whether it's more of a netbook type situation, which chances are you won't be able to use because of the software you need, or if it's a tablet or kind of a 3-in-1 type computer, they'll vary quite a bit. And then there are different settings within the device that you can change to lower your consumption, which I'll go over later as well. The mount itself, if you're looking at a very tiny, like Astro Tracker type mount that you pop on a tripod, its power requirements are really small. If you're looking at your typical astrophysics or software BISC type mount, it could run about 2 to 3 amps normally when it's just sitting there tracking. Maybe 4 or 5 or even 6 amps when it's slewing. And then there's some like the ASA mounts, which are direct drive and DC, and you're looking at 15 amps in DC power. So that requires quite a bit of battery power if you're out in the field with one of those. But most of them are going to run in the, I would say, 2 to 5 amp range in terms of power consumption for the mount. The cameras are going to vary quite a bit as well. If you're using a DSLR, you might be using 1.5 amps as it's exposing. But if you're using a cooled CCD camera, especially with a large chip, and you're cooling it, to 80–90% of its capacity, you could be looking at maybe 5 to 6 amps to run that camera. Focusers vary a lot as well, depending on the model and the load on the focuser. And then that's one thing that's only going to be used periodically throughout the night, so it's not much of a power consumer. Most of the time it's going to be sitting there unless you've got it responding to temperature changes, but still at that it's going to be doing little micro changes throughout the night, not drawing a whole lot of power. Dew heaters, on the other hand, which hopefully some of you are in Southern California, don't really need to use a whole lot, but they do still come into play. And those are pretty big power consumers because they're essentially just creating heat, and that usually takes a lot of power to do that. So depending on if you have a small scope and maybe you have it on the objective, or maybe you have a 12 or 14-inch scope and you've got it around the primary and around the secondary and things like that, you could be using quite a bit of power in dew heaters. Then the inverter itself, if you're not running everything on 12 volts and you need 110 volts and you're running an inverter, the inverter itself consumes a little bit of power to make that voltage transformation, so be aware of that as well. So if you just look at those numbers there, it seems like you're looking at about 3 to 20 amps, which seems kind of crazy, especially if you've got maybe a 20 or 40 amp hour battery. You're only going to be able to run an hour or two in a night, which doesn't sound very promising. But when you actually look at things and how they're used, and the fact that each of these items aren't being used at their full maximum power consumption capabilities, your actual power needs aren't quite as high. So with this particular setup where you've got a laptop, a mount, camera, maybe a second camera, a focuser, maybe some smaller dew heaters set to low, and an inverter, 3 to 8 amps is more realistic. Because again, the mount's not constantly slewing, it's usually just tracking there. The camera, if it's a DSLR with its shutter open, still isn't taking that much power. Focuser is very periodic and not being used throughout the night. So I'll show you in a little bit a better way to get a firm grasp on what your power needs actually are. Again, these are just estimates based on looking at your power supplies with various devices, and that's not always the best route. It can give you an idea again, but again, it's not going to be an accurate representation of what you're actually using in a given night. So this slide here is not the way I was hoping it would show up, since it's not in presentation mode here. What I first wanted to show was, let me bring this guy to the front. So this is your typical multimeter. It can easily show you the voltage of your battery. It can easily show you some other things, but the important thing that you want to look at is how many amps you're using. And while this one can do it, it requires you to disconnect things, put the multimeter in line to see what current you're drawing. And that can be pretty disruptive to the rest of the things that you're trying to do, especially if you want to get a read on it at some random time in the night. You have to kind of essentially shut everything down and then check it and then restart. Voltage is a good indicator if you just want to check things throughout the night. Fully charged battery, car type battery, is going to be about 12.8 volts. As soon as you put a load on it, it's going to drop. But assuming it's a pretty normal load and everything's just running, that'll drop maybe a quarter to a half a volt. You can kind of just check it with one of these multimeters throughout the night and see as it drops. In most cases, for your typical flooded car battery, if you get below about 11.5 volts, you might want to really check things out, especially if that's the battery in your car to start your car. You generally don't want to do that because you can easily run it down and kind of be stuck. But if you have some spare batteries or extra batteries that you're using to power everything, it's not as critical, although you still want to keep an eye on things to make sure things don't start acting weird or shutting down on you. But the other item here, if I can bring it back to the front, is a clamp type multimeter. And this is going to give you a much better read on what your setup is actually running at any given time. What you do is just open up that clamp, and put it around either your positive or negative lead from your battery. It doesn't really matter which one, you're just going to get a positive or a negative number, but the number itself is what you're interested in. And it's going to tell you exactly how many amps you're running. So if you've got your laptop going, your mount is slewing, and your camera is exposing, not that you would be doing a mount slew and a camera exposing at the same time, but just to get a full read on how much power is being used. It'll tell you right then and there, and as the mount comes to a stop, you'll see the power consumption go down. If you do some things to your laptop and trying to save some power there, you'll see it go down. So a clamp type meter is easy to use. Just pop it on the cable, check how much power you're using, take it off when you don't need it, and just kind of keep an eye on things to really give you a good, accurate representation of how much power you're going to need. And I've got a little demonstration of that in a little bit, which you can use to get a pretty good estimate of your power consumption for a given night. So I think next I'm going to go into batteries. Thought this might be a good time for a break, see if there's any kind of questions.
We do have some questions, and we have some people that are just astounding me with their witticisms about what's going on and stuff. But by the way, Danny, you can go ahead and just show the presentation as if you were showing it on a screen, and it'll come out right on your screen. And as it comes out on your screen, you've got the full thing.
Yeah, just hoping to have the video.
When you asked me about presenter view earlier, I thought you wanted, how you could put your notes on it and have two screens running at the same time. That's not possible with the way we do this Google Hangout thing. But if you just hit, show the slideshow, it'll run just like you've got a screen and a projector and everything.
Is that what you're seeing right now?
Yeah. If you hit the show the program, it'll just show the program. The one, we've got a set of questions from Molly, but I'm going to hold them off because I think you're going to be talking about it later in the presentation. Okay. So
great.
Yeah, you can continue with where you're going.
Okay, great. I'll try to go to actual presentation mode.
Yeah, just go to presentation mode and it'll just run like it's a presentation.
Right. That looks good there, full screen.
I'm still getting you as in presentation mode, or no? Yeah, I'm still getting you in. I don't know what I'm getting you in.
Yeah, I'm still just seeing the normal, like the screen you had previously. Just hit like F5.
Oh, you know what, Danny?
Don't
worry about it. It's coming out fine, and let's not experiment now. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, you might have two screens set up separately or something like that. So let's just go with what you've been doing because it's working fine.
Okay, sounds good.
But definitely go back to sharing your screen because as cute as you are, we need to see your screen.
That's just creepy, Alex, but thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk just a little bit about the different battery technologies that are out there. Most of us are aware of them, but it might still be a good primer for some. So your typical car battery that is likely in your non-hybrid, non-electric, regular gasoline car is a flooded lead acid battery. Usually has a couple caps on them and it needs water occasionally. Those work great, but they are a bit cumbersome. They can spill because there is water in them and they just have little caps. And if you're driving around on a rough road or it tips over or something, that could be a problem. The sealed batteries or valve regulated batteries are a little bit better in that regard, or a lot better actually. Your gel cells and your AGM, they're completely sealed. They could be used in any orientation. They can be on their side. They can be upside down. They're just a bit more rugged than your typical flooded battery. And they will give you a slightly better performance, maybe last a little longer, but they are a little bit more expensive as well. And there's no maintenance for AGM batteries. So AGM is preferred, at least by me. I think they're just easier to deal with. You do have lithium ion available these days, but it is still fairly expensive for the same capacity that you would get in a lead acid battery. They are a lot lighter though, which makes things really nice. For the same capacity, you're looking at half or even less of the weight as a typical lead acid battery. There are a few different types of lithium ion, but lithium polymer or LiPo is the most common right now. In a few years, you might see some other ones taken over in that regard, but I think LiPo is probably around for quite a while. And in most of the little, what are called solar generators that are out there that I'll probably go over, or I'll go over in a little bit, they're all using those types of batteries. Another great advantage of lithium-ion batteries is that you generally get the full rated capacity of the battery. So if it says it's a 20 amp hour battery, you're going to get maybe 18 or 20 amp hours. With a flooded battery, you're going to get a lot less, maybe 50 to 70%, depending on the quality of the battery, the particular technology, how new it is, how well it's charged, all that good stuff. So if you have a, let's say, 100 amp hour battery that's lead acid, you're not going to get 100 amp hours out of it. You're probably going to get about maybe 70, maybe 60 amp hours. So that's always something to keep in mind. And just real quick, all of these are AGM except this one. It's pretty obvious just by, it's got these caps up here that you can pry off with a screwdriver, fill your water. You'll notice that none of these have those. Next thing to consider after your batteries is the inverter, if you need one. Not all people do. If you can get your mount and your laptop and your camera and anything else that you're using to run off of 12 volts, then you can skip the inverter. But when you are out in the middle of nowhere or at a star party that doesn't have AC power available, it's still nice to have an inverter, just if for nothing else, things like charging your phone or your tablet or powering other little devices might come in handy for that. The basic technologies for inverters, most people are probably aware. There's a pure sine wave, which gives you a signal that's very much like you would get at home with AC power, and a modified sine wave, which estimates that that signal with a stepped sine wave. And there are pluses and minuses to each. In most cases, for us, it won't really matter too much which one you get. There are some pieces of equipment out there that might get really picky on a modified sine wave inverter. So if you're really unsure, you might try a modified sine wave inverter to start. They're a lot cheaper. But even pure sine wave inverters have become fairly inexpensive lately. There was a time when they were enormously expensive and out of the range of most people, but that's changed quite a bit, and they're fairly easy to come by and afford. So if you do need an inverter and you're going to get one, try and decide between the type, whether it's pure or modified. Total wattage, again, if you're just running your astronomy equipment off of it, you aren't going to need the huge 1,000 watt, 2,000 watt inverters. 300, 400, 500 watts is even probably overkill, depending on your laptop, depending on your camera. But I've been using a 300 watt inverter. In fact, the actual one shown here. It's been working great. I've never had a need for more wattage from it, so it's been great. Other things to look for, depending on your setup and how you like to do things. USB charging outlets are often included in the inverters, which is handy. A remote switch, especially if you're in an RV. Fuse type and whether it's accessible. Some of them bury the fuse inside the inverter and it's nearly impossible to get to. There's the cylinder type fuses, there are the blade type fuses, so not terribly important, but something to think about. And then your connector options. The really cheap inverters, the modified sine wave ones, they're typically going to have just a cable that comes out and goes into a cigarette lighter type socket. Probably want to avoid those just so you can change the cable if you need to, change the connector type if you want a clamp type connector or a ring connector or a cigarette lighter connector. You could be able to change that. So just another item to look out for when you're shopping for an inverter. And then a couple items that have come onto the market somewhat recently, I mean, they've been out for a little while, are these kind of solar generators is how they're being marketed, which is kind of misleading because they're not really generating any power. They're just batteries. But the nice thing about them is you've got your batteries, you've got your built-in inverter, you've got different types of power connectors, regular AC, USB, Anderson power pole connectors, cigarette lighter type connectors, all in one package. The problem is that once you get to a capacity that's really useful, if you have a fairly large astrophotography rig, is they get pretty darn pricey. The Goal Zero Yeti that I've got that I'm showing here is pretty expensive, up around $1,800. That's for the lithium-ion version. And the iNergy Kodiak is also fairly expensive, a little cheaper, but still really expensive. Hopefully the prices on those types of things will come down because they are really nice to just have an all-in-one package. And if you don't need a whole lot of capacity in your batteries, there are smaller versions of these, which are more affordable. Goal Zero seems to go by the philosophy that you pay $1 for every watt hour for some reason. So if you get their 1200 watt hour version, it's $1,200. And they do have lead acid versions of these as well, which are cheaper, but again, they're a lot heavier and somewhat bigger in some cases. Just real quick, some simple ways to save power if you are using something like a laptop or even a tablet in most cases. To turn down screen brightness, that makes a huge difference in how much your laptop will consume. If you don't need Wi-Fi, if you're connecting everything with cables and you don't even have Wi-Fi where you are, there's no need to have it on. That can save some power. If you have the battery in the laptop that you can take out, unlike a Mac, go ahead and take that out because the battery, your external battery, is just going to want to keep charging the internal battery. The laptop's going to use the internal battery, and then the battery's going to charge it. It's not going to make a huge difference in your external battery's capacity, but it just kind of simplifies things. It's maybe a little scary because you don't have that backup in case you disconnect the cable by accident, but it does just simplify things a little bit. And then just think about, do you really need to do heaters? Can you use DC power supplies on all of your equipment rather than an inverter, which consumes a bit of power? Maybe you cool the camera a little less, maybe to 20 below ambient instead of 30 below. Minimize mouse lose as much as possible. Again, that's a pretty temporary thing. It's not a huge power saver, but if you're out there and you're doing a 800 point T-point run for one night of imaging, you might want to think about reducing that a little bit. And then another little thing on the laptop is if you can replace your hard drive with a solid state drive rather than a traditional platter drive, that'll save you a little power as well. So real quick here, hoping this works. I might have to go into presentation mode to make this work. Let's see. This is just me measuring what my equipment is using with a clamp type multimeter. So you'll see it's hovering around 7, 8, 9 amps. That's everything running pretty much at full capacity. I've got the screen brightness on the laptop up, Wi-Fi on, cooling of the camera is up at 90%. But then what I do is I reduce the screen brightness, turn off Wi-Fi, let the cooling come down on the camera a little bit to just 80% of its capacity. And instead of running at about 8 or 9 amps, I'm running at about between 5.5 and 6. So those 2.5 amps can make quite a bit of difference over the course of the night. And you'll need a less battery power if you're able to do something like that. Okay. So you've been out in the field for a night and you've used your batteries. Let's assume everything went well. You're going to be out there a few more nights, so now you need to charge everything. Whether it's one of the all-in-one type devices that we looked at, or you've got just some, car type batteries. There are a few different ways to charge those things. You can have an actual, wall unit that charges them, which you're likely going to have to wait till you get home to use that. You can charge them via DC with a generator or another larger battery, maybe somebody else's battery who isn't looking. Just kidding. I would not recommend trying to charge you from your vehicle. You might find yourself in a situation with a drained battery, and even though you have some other batteries, you might not have the right cables, or you might not have the amount of capacity in those other batteries that you need to start your car. So it's generally a good idea not to use your car battery unless you're just using something really small, like one of those small tracking mounts or something like that. It seems like the gasoline generator used to be the default way to recharge your batteries. I think we all know the disadvantages of those. You have to carry around gasoline. They tend to smell. They require some maintenance, somewhat noisy. Even the quiet ones are noisy. Solar, I think, has gotten to a point where you can do just about anything you need, and it's not terribly expensive anymore. In fact, you can spend a lot less on solar than you would a good quiet generator like some of those from Honda. You know, there are some disadvantages for either one. I've been using solar for a few years now to recharge my equipment, and as long as you get a large enough panel, you're pretty much good to go. Obviously, it depends on the weather, but if you've got bad weather, then you're probably worried more about whether or not you're going to be imaging anyway. So something to think about. And the panels out there have gotten a lot thinner and lighter. There are still the heavy ones out there, of course, with the aluminum frames that get a bit bulky, but you can get the same capacity, the same wattage out of solar panels now that are flexible. They fold up to like a 1/2 inch. They're really lightweight. You can take them anywhere. I'll show you a couple examples in a little bit. And just real quick on solar. So there are some differences out there. The differences in them are somewhat less significant than they used to be. The main types out there are polycrystalline and monocrystalline. Monocrystalline has the best efficiency, but you're talking about, you know, maybe 19% efficient versus 16 or 17% efficient. So there's not the huge difference that there used to be. And monocrystalline used to be a lot more expensive. They still are somewhat, but not by a huge factor. There's also amorphous out there, which is an older technology, fairly low efficiency. And so you need either a lot of area on them and, you know, in other words, larger panels. And they're actually getting a little more difficult to find. So monocrystalline and polycrystalline are your best bets out there right now. And I don't really have a huge preference over one or the other. I tend to stick with monocrystalline, but maybe that's just me. I don't think there's any real need to go one way or the other. Now, if you're trying to power your entire house and get off the grid, that's a different situation. But when we're talking about trying to charge a battery with 40 or 50 amps in a day, that's you're going to do fine with either one of those. And just real quick on the solar, so this is one of those that's really lightweight. I think this particular one, it gives you 200 watts, which is quite a bit of charging power. It pulls up, you can see on each seam here. And the whole thing is probably about 3/4 of an inch thick when it's fully folded up. So you need your solar panels, you need your charge controller, you need the cables, and you need a carry case in some cases, maybe. What's nice about these thin, flexible ones is they are essentially sewn into their own carry case. So you just fold them up and they've got a canvas-like outer case that's ready to go. So this particular one, which is 200 watts, you can get that for about $250. It's going to give you about 14 amps of charging power. So if you have 6 hours of good sunlight, that's going to restore about 85 amps into your batteries, which is not bad at all. And again, it all comes back to knowing what your power needs are, what your equipment uses, how much you're going to use in a night. Some people, a good night of astro imaging is 2 or 3 hours. Other people, it's 6 to 8 hours. So you need to take that into consideration as well. If you're using 5 amps with your equipment each hour, or 5 amps with your equipment, and you run 3 hours, you're only going to need 15 amp hours of battery power. But if you're running that same 5 amps for a good 8 hours in a night, you're going to need 40 amps of battery power. So just things to keep in mind. I think take another break here for any questions, if that's okay. I think
yeah, I think it's about time we ask them. Let's see. Might be a good time to ask the question we started with. Let me make sure I go all the way back up here to the beginning.
I've got some things to show here as well in the meantime, maybe. Just real quick, so I think when the topic comes up, a lot of people ask about power distribution and things like Anderson power poles. If anybody's familiar with those, I've got an example here. Really simple and makes things easy because you just match the colors, plug them in, and it gives you a pretty solid connection, but it's also really easy to disconnect. So if you've got a bunch of different equipment and batteries to connect in parallel and things like that, makes it really nice. And this is one thing I didn't show in the slide presentation, but this is an inline multimeter. So you essentially just connect one side to your battery and the other side goes out to your load, which is all of your telescope equipment and camera and laptop. And it draws very little power itself, and throughout the night it'll show you the voltage of your battery, the amperage currently being used. Can even show you things like watt hours. So just a lot of different ways to look at your power consumption in a given night and keep an eye on it throughout the night.
Thank you.
Dan, Daniel?
Yeah.
Could you show how those power pole connectors slide into each other?
Yeah, so you can
because the reason why I'm saying is because in the dark you can't see which one is red, which one is black. And I've seen people reverse plug them, and if you sister them together, then you eliminate the possibility of plugging them backwards.
Right. So you can buy a lot of cables pre-made, or you can just buy the connectors and make the cables yourself. But assuming you do connect them correctly, it's hard to see here, but they are kind of connected with these. There's a little bit of a ridge there and a little bit of a valley in there, and the same thing in between. So they slide together, and so they're not gonna come apart and potentially reverse them. So if I'm trying to do that, there's no way they're gonna go together. You can kind of see it's got a little bit of an offset on the bottom, and so they have to be lined up. So you could try all night trying to connect them like that, and it's just not going to work. And so if you do get that and you're feeling that in the dark, you just need to flip one side and they'll go together. You can also put.
But my point is, if you don't have them sistered together,
right,
in the dark, you don't know which one is red, which one is black. You plug the wrong one into the wrong one, and just there goes your camera.
Right, and so I can do in here. Yeah, so if you have them like that, that could be a problem. So you just want to make sure you take advantage of the little built-in connectors on them, which I'm having a little trouble seeing right here. But essentially they slide back together and will stay like that. And there's a little hole right here that's meant for a little pin to go in there, and that's just further security to keep them from sliding out from each other.
Molly, do you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your questions about the your camera and stuff? Yeah.
So I've got a ZWO ASI 1600mm Pro, so like a CMOS Astro camera, and it runs on 12. The cooler runs on 12-volt power, and it comes with an AC power supply. But I'd like to plug that into like a power tank, for instance, for when I'm at star parties that don't have AC power. I know that it's center positive, just like my telescope. So, like, could I plug that in using the same cable as my center positive telescope, since it's also 12-volt, into my power tank, or do I need some kind of power regulation or something else on that?
I'm definitely not going to give you a solid answer on that, because that can mean the difference between frying your equipment and not. So that's something you want to be really careful with. On most of these like power tanks here that I've like the Goal Zero and some of those, they do have those type of connectors, like the 5.5 and 2.5 millimeter, round connectors. You're just going to want to make sure that you do have the center positive or center negative correct. If it has, is it just a single cable with no like power supply in line?
So the AC one has of course the power supply, the AC/DC converter in the middle, but it's the same barrel tip as my telescope. So I was afraid to try it, even though it makes sense that it should work. But yeah,
if it's just a cable and it doesn't have a power supply in line or a transformer or anything like that, you're probably okay connecting it directly to 12 volts. But again, I would just really make sure about the polarity, and then also see if you can find out what its voltage tolerance is. So if your battery drops to 11.5 volts or something, is it still going to be okay, or is it going to drop out on you at that point? Most of that equipment will probably go to around 11 volts. That's really hard to say. Everything kind of is different.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Is there anything else, Molly? Okay. Let's see. We were talking about the power tanks. Are you going to talk about the power tanks, the Celestron power tank and that kind of thing, Danny?
I don't have that in the slide, but I could. Those are, I mean, they've got a different, a wide variety of them now. The old ones used to be just like 12 or 17 amp hours, I think. Which if you're doing astrophotography on, the scale that I think most of us are talking about, that's probably not going to get you very far. But I think they've come out with some newer ones more recently that do have much greater capacity, and similar to the types of things that I showed before. I haven't looked into those particular ones a whole lot, so I can't really comment too much on them.
Okay, basically what they are is a sealed lead acid battery, which you can buy for like 7 amp hours worth of sealed lead acid battery can get, that's $20 to $30. And
yeah, those are good if you're running just your Celestron CPC or your Meade LX90 or LX200. But if you introduce a laptop and a camera and all those kinds of things, that's not going to last you very long.
Right. But what I'm saying is that, or you could put 2 or 3 of them together and that kind of stuff. But what I want people to know is that those big fancy power packs with the lights and the radio and all the switches and dials and buttons and everything, what you really need out of them is a sealed lead acid battery, which costs about $20 out of $20 to $30 out of that whole mess of stuff that you're getting there. And that, and a couple of cigarette lighter plugs and some other things. And really that's what you're buying, and you may be paying $150 for it. And so you might want to consider looking into that. I have been told by the chat conversation over here that one of those will last you a night. One of the Celestron power packs will last you a night.
It depends on what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have that kind of confidence, but I don't use them either, as you know. I think I just said that. So
if you're just running the telescope and like a tablet computer off of it, then yeah, my 7 amp hour has lasted me all night.
Yeah.
As soon as I put dew heaters into the mix,
Ooh.
then I have 2 power tanks, a 7 amp hour and a 17 amp hour, and I use 17 for the dew heaters and the 7 for the rest of it. So it can be done, but you have to have a couple of them.
Yeah, I wanted to share the screen again real quick, Alex.
go ahead.
Something else here. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yep.
So this is something I made a while back, which is more about power distribution than power itself. But so you've got your battery and you've got your inverter and all these different things, but it's kind of tricky at that point because some things require, the cigarette lighter style socket. Some of them require the small, like 5mm, 5.5 millimeter cylindrical items. Some of them require AC power. So all this is like a 17-inch Craftsman toolbox. I'll show you the front here. Punched some holes, mounted some panel mount cigarette lighter sockets, some USB ports, some AC sockets, and some 12-volt powered sockets there as well. Put it all in that toolbox, and I don't have a photo of the back, but the back just has input for the battery in a master power switch. And then if you go back inside, it doesn't obviously need to be this complicated, but you can have this inverter and your USB hub, all just sitting on the ground. That's perfectly fine. But this was kind of a prelude to those more complex Goal Zero and some of the other power tanks that are out there, where they have all this kind of stuff nicely built in and nicely integrated. So this was my attempt several years ago before all that was available. And real quick also, so if you're, let me cancel this. So again, if you're powering a large mount with a laptop and again, like dew heaters, that takes a lot of power and you're gonna need a fair amount of battery capacity, and 7 amp hour power tank or something like that isn't gonna hold you very long. But like we were saying, if you're just using the scope and maybe a tablet, it will work fine for that. But also, I think a lot of people are familiar with these types of mounts, just the Skywatcher, Star Adventurer, that kind of stuff. What's nice about those, and that one in particular, is it runs off 5 volts instead of 12 volts, and you can just use your your external phone battery for that kind of stuff. And it actually is meant to run off those. It actually comes right off, has 5 volts right there, uses a regular mini USB port, and that just plugs directly into your phone charger battery, and you're good for several nights actually on just this battery and that mount.
I have a quick question on that actually.
Yep.
So I have a Vixen Polary that I was using that same thing for, and some of my cell phone batteries they would shut off after like 10 minutes. And is there something that you can look for in the product description that will know whether or not it will shut off? I think it's looking for some kind of active signal from the device or something.
Yeah, if your mount, the Polary isn't drawing enough current, the battery pack might shut down. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if there's a workaround for that other than just keeping an eye on it, which is.
I have another battery pack that doesn't shut down, so I wasn't sure if there was some kind of.
Probably more the battery pack than the mount. Some of them might have a threshold. If it's not being drawn, it figures the item is charged and it just shuts down.
Okay.
Danny, John at Astra asks if there are any batteries perform better at lower temperatures than others.
Yeah, I mean, there is a difference between lead acid or within lead acid, the flooded and the AGM. AGM tends to do a little better, but every battery is going to suffer in cold temperatures. It's not going to provide the capacity that it would in warmer temperatures. Lithium ion has the same issue. I think, can't remember off the top of my head if it's about the same or if it's actually more sensitive to that. I want to say that it's more sensitive to cold temperature, the lithium ion that is. I've been relying on AGM batteries for quite a while, and they work really well. They don't seem to be as sensitive to cold temperatures. But again, they are a little more expensive than your typical flood acid, but at the same time, you don't need to really do anything other than keep them charged. You never have to worry about what position they're in or how much water's in them and all that good stuff.
Okay, cool. Next couple of comments, Dylan and George talk about the power tanks rating. The lithium, Celestron lithium is at 86.4 watt hours, and the Pro version's at 158 watt hours. So let's see, what else? And Almico uses a marine battery at 101 amp hours. Okay.
Yep. And remember, if those are lead acid batteries, you're not getting 100 amp hours out of that. You're getting maybe 70, maybe 60.
Yeah. And by the way, guys, marine batteries, there's 3 different ratings on the batteries. One's your automotive battery, and it is not meant to be discharged deeply. Okay, so you shouldn't take it down to 10.5 or something like that. You should keep it up above 11. Then there's the deep cycle batteries, and a lot of people think marine batteries are deep cycle batteries. They aren't. Deep cycle batteries are made to go way, way, way down and just keep giving you power for a while, and they can be discharged rather deeply. Then in between, if you've got a marine battery, it's meant to be able to do a little bit of both. It'll give you cold cranking, which means it can crank that starter for a little bit, and it can also be drawn down a ways. But in that compromise, you're actually losing some of the ability to go really deep. So marine batteries are good, but they're not true deep cycle batteries. So keep that in mind as you go through things.
Yeah, and as far as lead acid batteries, the best combination is AGM deep cycle, because you're going to be able to run it down to about maybe 10.7, 10.5 volts without damaging things. And the spiral ones, like the Optima batteries, are even a little more resilient in that regard. Whereas if you use a typical flooded battery, if you run it down to close to 10.5 or even 11 volts, those plates inside there might start warping and the battery becomes useless after that.
Yeah. And by the way, some of your equipment may not work if it gets down that low. Some of your equipment may not want to be below 11 volts or something.
Right.
And Linda comments that she's got a Yeti. And let's see. And there's some talking about trying to import batteries across country, as customs and stuff like that. but they're not really questions. And I made a comment that if you're going to be traveling during the day, like you're going up to Death Valley and imaging all night and traveling around to Zabriskie Point and all that other stuff all day, it is okay to charge your battery in your car.
While your car's running, yeah.
Yeah, if your car's going to be running, yeah, go ahead and do it, but otherwise, no. And then George is showing off tremendously. He thinks he's showing off his battery, but he's also showing off a couple of images in the background. Yay, George. And then some comment. Am I missing anything here, guys? Almeco brings 2 batteries to the field, one for the laptop and the other to power the rig and all the accessories. And George comments.
If I can interrupt real quick, Alex, there's a lot of different strategies as far as that's concerned. Yeah, it's not terribly critical that one item run off its own battery, but in some cases that might be the best route to go just because of maybe your physical setup. Maybe you like to set up further from the telescope and you need something for your laptop. But also keep in mind that you can get multiple batteries and connect them in parallel, so you can take 3 50-amp batteries and get 150 amp hours.
Yeah.
Considering the 70-80% rule of lead acid batteries. Another thing that's interesting about lithium-ion batteries is that when they're dead, they're dead. They just shut off. Whereas with lead acid, it kind of tails off, and you can still use them. You can still get some power out of them. Your equipment may not like it, but you can still use them. Whereas lithium-ion, they reach their when they're dead, and they're not going to provide you any more power after that until they're charged, of course.
Okay, where am I going with this? Everybody else can kind of read along. I'm trying to get to things that we need to ask Danny about. Marine batteries are $80 at Wally World. Yeah, marine batteries will do the job for you, and they're available and stuff like that. I didn't mean to diss them too badly. Just remember that there is even more powerful arrangements. For instance, my RV, which runs on 12 volts, actually runs on 2 6-volt batteries that are wired together in series, and they're true deep cycle batteries as opposed to anything else. So, but that's a lot of weight to carry around. And Dylan wanted to point out, probably in response maybe to what I just said, you won't kill your actual camera chip if the power is low.
Nope. No, usually the only thing you're going to hurt is the battery if you run it too low. Most of the equipment that you would connect to will just shut off, or it'll start acting a little weird.
George points out that you can use hand warmers during cold temps for batteries. And I don't think, well, there's some other suggestions here. Don't start a fire near a battery, though. That wouldn't do good. That wouldn't be good.
Probably not, yeah.
What day are most of you going to NEAF? We'll have to ask that later.
Don't plug a hairdryer into your battery to warm up the battery. That's not a good idea.
Particularly if if it's one of those 12-volt hair dryers that you're powering off your battery.
I have wrapped a dew heater around my battery before to keep it warm.
Yeah, I mean, you're taking the power to give it back to the battery. You're probably using more power than the benefit you're getting it from keeping it warm, but
but it lived.
Chow points out that you can use a rig runner also to help distribute your power.
Yep, those are very common, very popular. Just gives you a lot of connectors in one place. You do have to, in most cases, create some custom cables to go to everything, but it can provide a really clean, neat setup.
Nicole, I'm not sure what the specifications are for Celestron's smaller power tank. I think you'd be better off just kind of looking that up. Maybe somebody does know and they can answer that a little bit later.
Yeah, and I would say don't get too stuck on a brand or marine, deep cycle, those words. Really look at either the watt hour or the amp hour capacity, because that's really what you're going to need. If you're using it to run your equipment, you don't care about cranking amps or cold cranking amps or any of that stuff.
And the next question coming, Almeco keeps them on a battery charger when at home. Tell me what you do to keep your batteries healthy.
So I have a charger that I keep at home, and it will, if I just keep it connected, it will keep it everything charged. But I generally just want to get it up to capacity, and I will disconnect it at that point rather than keeping it plugged in 100% of the time. And then just every 2 weeks, on it to make sure the voltage is being regulated or being maintained. If it gets down to 12.5 or so, then I'll reconnect it. But yeah, it's a good point to make sure that you do keep an eye on the voltage. Lead acid is a little more picky to remaining topped off. You don't want to leave them discharging on their own for too long. You want to make sure you keep an eye on them. AGM's a little better, but still has kind of the same issue. And lithium ion the technology varies quite a bit, but most of them today will self-discharge to a certain point, and they'll stay there not indefinitely, but for quite a long time, and don't need as much maintenance and oversight as the others do.
I've got on my Outlook program, we all got it on our computer, just a regular calendar program, a monthly reminder on the first Sunday of every month to go out and check my batteries. And so on my RV batteries and my, well, that's the only ones I've got anymore now. But I always check the water levels on them and make sure that they've got a charge above 12.0. So that's just one of the things I do.
Yeah, I think anyone with an RV is probably at an advantage understanding all this, because they've dealt with it for a while, and they might have already had integrated solar panels and a solar charger and cutoff switches and all that good stuff.
Do deep cycle batteries come with cigarette lighter sockets or something that helps get power from them? No, they don't. But at Walmart, $12.95, get a little alligator clips or various things, and they're Pep Boys, everything's, you can get them everywhere.
Yeah, you can get cigarette lighter sockets. I've got one here. It's just a single one. It goes to an Anderson power pole connector.
But could you hold that up where Danny's got the Anderson power poles? You could also have alligator clips or bolt on to the side of the battery.
And there's a lot of they'll have 3 or 5 of these on end in one adapter.
Yeah. Tip and a half for you. Come by, say, oh, bust your chops. I have a request file. Who do I email it to? I'll get back to that one because this is a great way. Depth of discharge ratings are worth noting. I don't know what that means. Danny, do you know depth of discharge ratings?
Just how deeply you're safe to discharge the battery, usually measured in volts. So if your lead acid battery is typically 12.8 fully charged, I forget what the actual cutoff is for those, but I think for a standard flooded lead acid, it's probably about 11 volts. You don't want to go any lower than that. Like I said, you're then risking warping the plates inside, which will destroy the battery permanently. If it's not too bad, you're still affecting the capacity over a lifetime. And if you go really low and you do it a couple times, you're essentially killed the battery forever.
Golf cart batteries, is Ant-Man suggesting that. By the way, there are also wheelchair batteries that can be used for this kind of stuff.
And those and some of the deep cycle batteries, the reason they're a little better is because they've got thicker plates, so they can be discharged more deeply without damage. And I think typically, I'm not positive about this, but I think your wheelchair batteries, your little hover-around batteries, golf cart batteries, those are usually going to be deep cycle and have a little better construction quality.
Can you explain what float charging or what float level is? And I don't know if you did. I'm half listening to you.
Depending on your battery type, you can get a float charger, which you plug it in and it'll charge your battery to capacity, but then you just leave it plugged in and it'll constantly monitor the voltage of the battery and just give it a small voltage as needed. So you can essentially just leave it plugged in forever. It'll keep it topped off without overcharging the battery or overheating it or anything like that.
Okay. Terry notes that the Andersons are self-cleaning contact design, and Almiko points out that you can pick up a battery charger very inexpensively. Not a battery, I'm sorry, a meter. And that's one of the things that the Harbor Freight gives away. If you watch their advertisements regularly. They give away voltmeters. The wires die after about 5 uses, but that's kind of cool to play with. Okay, Danny, we're caught up on the questions. There are some other comments about NEEF and some other things that are going on, but we're going to get back to you. You want to take it from there?
Well, I actually think I am done in terms of the presentation.
Oh, cool. Okay, so we are caught up. How about a master fusing or fusing this arrangement?
It's not a bad idea. A lot of your equipment may have inline fuses, but it's a good idea to have a master fuse that is right around the maximum of what you expect to draw. You don't want to go too low because then you're just going to keep blowing the fuse. And you don't want to go too high because it's never going to blow, even if you've got a problem where it's going to take too long. So yeah, keep an eye on that. I would suggest looking up the different types of fuses, fast blow, slow blow, all those kinds of things. And you really kind of need to understand the power that you're drawing and consuming to get the right rating on the fuse.
Okay. For those of you who are watching out on and you're not able to follow, you're watching later and you're not able to follow along with the Rumble Talk, Baza has given us a link to nightskyandfocus.com, do-it-yourself projects, do-it-yourself-field battery. And you know, sorry, I can't get that to you in any easy way, but that sounds like it might be a good idea. Maybe Baza, you can run it and do a presentation on the Astro Imaging channel on it at some point. And somebody asked earlier, how do you get something onto the Astro Imaging channel? I think that if you go to the astroimagingchannel.com, which you all know how to get to because you're there now, unless you're on YouTube someplace later, and you can see our contact information for how to get things to us. I'm going to check that. Okay, is there somebody else in the room that has any comments or anything that they need to say? I'm going to be checking some stuff here. I guess not. Okay. Danny, could you show us your website a little bit and some of the other stuff you do?
Oh, sure. So as Alex mentioned, I'm a member of the Riverside Astronomical Society. I've been a member there, I think, close to 13, 14 years now. But like Alex, I've got an observatory out there, so I do like to get out in the field as much as I can. For me, that means usually the Mojave National Preserve somewhere. It's still got very dark skies, especially to the south, which is nice if you're looking at trying to get some Milky Way shots. And of course, there's obviously no power available out there, so I find myself using the batteries quite a bit. So here's my site, californiastars.net, if you want to check it out. There's some articles in the, where do I have them? Maybe in equipment? Actually, I don't know if I have links up to them right now, but I do have some items there that you might find useful as far as links, some videos, blogs, stuff like that. And on the contact or about me page, there's an email address. Feel free to reach out to me from there.
Thank you. And for those of you that want the answer to that earlier question, contact at theastroimagingchannel.com. And as I said, it's right along the top ribbon of our website, how to contact us if you have any suggestions. We really do appreciate Danny coming in here and helping us give a presentation. Danny is a practiced presenter and appreciate his effort here. He's a real class act, really, incidentally, guys. He does things really, really well. But some of us may not feel comfortable just getting up here and doing it. But I got to tell you guys, it's not that hard to do. You're basically visiting with a bunch of people that like you anyway, and you're just showing stuff that you're doing. So I want to encourage you to make your presentations, contact us with something you've got, or if you've got a buddy that does a really good job, talk him in or her into giving a presentation. We want presentations, as you know by now, of all sorts, from all sorts of people, of all sorts of ability level. Okay. Danny, do you have a name on cloudy nights? Do you ever go there? I don't think you do you?
I do, man. I haven't been there in a long time. I don't even recall what my username is at this point. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. And I think we've got all the other questions. There may be some coming in as we go along, but that was a great presentation, Danny. And we are going to get ready for Ron Brecher coming in next week with some stuff about Pix Insight, advanced pixel math and stuff like that. So that'll be cool. And then we're going to get ready to go to NEAF. Now, for all of you who are talking about NEAF in there, in the meantime, yeah, we should get together. I mean, you know what I look like, kind of, and you know what Tolga looks like, and I know we're going to be there. I don't know who all else is going to be there. Dylan says he's going to be there. That's cool. And for those of you, there was a question that kind of slipped by a couple of weeks back about AIC. Who's going to AIC? I'm going to AIC. I'll be presenting at AIC about the Sequence Generator Pro. And I know Eric goes to AIC every year. But for those of you who don't know about AIC, it is a gathering of probably the top astroimagers from around the world. So it's a real class show up in San Jose at the end of November 16th, 17th, something like that. So you might want to look into that. And one other thing I should say, it is AIC. This is not AIC. This is TAIC. Don't confuse those things. This is a bunch of guys getting together and swapping what they know about astroimaging. That is some really high-class astroimagers talking about what they do. AIC is, they really know what they're doing there. Anyway, I think we got everything and all the questions. Do we, Tolga, do you see anything we need to point out or anything? Anybody else? NEAC is NEAF without all the visual astronomers, right? Not exactly. NEAC is a set of presentations. Actually, I should let Tolga take over on this, but NEAC is a set of presentations, and they do have a imaging vendor area. I think every one of those imaging vendors also show up over at NEAF, but then everybody else shows up over at NEAF also. So it's not the same. NEAC is definitely astroimagers, but NEAF is astroimagers and the visual astronomers. So Nicole
Right,
points out.
NEAC is like AIC. I would argue that it's probably larger than AIC. It's held every year, and the difference between NEAF and NEAC is NEAC is there are no sales. You can't buy anything. It's only for manufacturers. There are no vendors. It's only for manufacturers or sole importers of products, and then you get to talk to them one-on-one. It's very intimate. You're talking about 200-300 people in attendance versus 2,000-3,000 people at NEAF. So your favorite vendor may be swamped by questions. 20-30 people in front of over them. Where in NEAC you get to talk to them, face to face. So NEAC is Northeast Astroimaging Conference. So it's astroimaging. Another difference is that in NEAC there's science and pretty pictures. So there are a lot of talks about scientific imaging and pretty picture imaging. Like for instance, like the Ron Brecher next week, he's one of the presenters over there. Adam Block, who always with us once in a while, he's one of the presenters. Christopher Go, planetary imager, one of the top planetary imagers of the world, he's going to be there. But then there's going to be scientific workshop, and then at night, after the show, at night there are workshops. There are classes. You could sit there, bring your own data, or they provide data, and you sit there and do it with your instructor.
Very cool. Thanks, Tolga.
Alex, you there?
Oh, did